We're going to play a couple of dance-style hornpipes. Hornpipes usually are very kind of angular, you know, and kind of steadfast, set at a very slow kind of a rhythm for hard shoe dancing. But the couple we're going to play now are for people that are not subjected to the rules of competitions or anything like that. You just get out there and you mind your feet and just enjoy yourself to these kinds of tunes. And I believe these were recorded by a fellow from Paddy in County Galway, Tom Morrison, who came over to this country and resided in New York. Came over in 1914, and these were two of his tunes. We call them Tom Morrison's favourites.
platforms, which hopefully help you, those toward the back, to be able to see a little better. Next Tuesday, Joe Amato will be back in town talking about his new book about Sicily, so we hope you come back next week at 6:30, same thing. And we are very grateful to you as the voters of Minnesota for the Legacy Amendment, which funded this program, so thank you to you. Yay! And as part of that, we need to show that this was a valuable program. We know that, but we have to prove it. So we have a little survey thing for you to fill out, and we'll pass it out later. And for everyone that we get back with your name on it, you will be entered in a drawing for a signed copy of the first book in the series. So, everyone's going to fill one out, right? Right. All right, so that's all I have to say. So welcome to Erin and Paddy and the band. Great. Thank you.
Well, we are very informal here, so imagine that you're beside a fireside in Ireland. We're going to take you to Ireland tonight. Paddy's going to tell you a little bit about his memoir, The Road from Castlebarna, about growing up in Ireland in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. I think he'll stick to about the 50s, though, I'm not sure. He's claiming to be from the 50s. And then I'll tell you a little bit about the fourth novel in my series, The Book of Killowen. And all of my novels are based upon real stories of people or artifacts found in the bogs in Ireland. Quite a lot of people, you'd be surprised. So I'll turn it over to Paddy first, and he'll tell you a little bit about the book, maybe read you a little scene from his childhood. And then after you're done with our book portion of the program, we have some images and things as well. Then the lads are going to come back and play some more music for you. And if anybody's up for dancing, I have a few dances up my sleeve. It's not required. You don't have to dance, but we might clear a little area over here on this side if anybody is up for Waves of Tory or the Siege of Ennis or the Bonfire Dance or Haymaker's Jig, maybe. We'll see. We'll see what we're up for. So stick around, enjoy the evening. There are refreshments over there on the side, and so if you have to get up and help yourself to things, you know, it's very informal. Don't feel like you have to be stuck to your chair. And if you have questions for Paddy or for me, we'd love to hear them. We'd love to see if we can answer them. So don't make them too hard. So here, I'll hand you off to Paddy, and then I'll talk to you a little bit later.
Well, let's see. I wrote this memoir, which is about the first 1/3 of my life, and I began writing it about 4 years ago, mostly out of curiosity. I was just curious to see, could I do it? And, so I wrote the whole thing, first of all, with my own handwriting and a biro pen, and I began, but the first evening I wrote about 30 pages, and I was surprised at how well I was doing. And of course I had all these stories already, you know, hooked up in the back of my mind, stories of different events and different experiences from when I was a kid, back, especially in the 1940s and 50s, which was a great time in Ireland, socially speaking. People used to gather together, you know, meet in their houses. There would be house dances and people would visit each other. And there was a lot of storytelling, you know, around the fire, around the hearth. And I wrote a little bit about that. I also wrote about school days and some tyrannical school teachers. And I lived, of course, in the townsland of Castlebarna, which is a mile outside of Dangan, on the eastern side of Dangan, which was also known as Phillipstown years ago. And I lived in this, with my parents, in this little thatched two-room, I think there was 3 rooms altogether, thatched cottage, thatched with board and straw, and with no electricity or any kind of plumbing, or very unhygienic in comparison to nowadays. But But we had a great time. People were very generous, and neighbours, you know, and we'd play, have fun with neighbours' children, people visiting each other and all that kind of stuff. So there's probably about 64 different stories in this. And there's a story about the first circus that we ever saw. I think I was about 10 and my sister was 9. This circus came to town. I'd never seen an elephant before. And it was amazing, you know. And there was this boa constrictor that was on display, and this strong man that was part of the circus would, you know, get the snake to wrap itself around his torso, and we thought he was going to be killed. And he had great command over the snake. And this fascinated us. And there was these high wire acts as well, young women, you know, up on these high wires, and they're walking the long pole and all that. And what else? There was, yeah, I remember one year I attended my father, who was thatching the front of our house with board straw, and that was a great experience altogether. And he had a big long ladder that went from the ground up onto the roof and past the ridge, and I would go up. I wasn't very good for heights, but I managed to go up halfway, and I would supply him with scallops, which would be like hazel rods that he used to pin down the thatch on the roof, the freshly punched in thatch. So I could be going on all night, and I'll try and make it as short as possible, because we want to try and fit in a bit of music as well. But this is about a new teacher that came, and I'll just read a little bit. In another week, we were back at school, and with it, the same old insecurity and dread that caused so much nervous tension in me. I haven't written much about the fear I had of Muffy when he was the master at our boys' school, and I cannot speak on behalf of my schoolmates. And yet I can easily assume that most of the youngsters were sharing the same sense of dread that I felt. We didn't know what to expect, or what kind of mood this adult bully might be in, or what lessons he'd pick up from his bag of tricks. All we knew was that he enjoyed keeping us on the edge of our seats, and enjoyed ridiculing or deriding us for small mistakes and misspellings. During the month of January, some of us were told that we were to be moved to the older boys' room, which was beyond the partition. The news of this sickened my stomach with thoughts of the knuckled fists of McInerney, who sat on his throne behind his desk, not a stone's throw away. It was another month before we were marched in a single file from our classroom to where McInerney stood, cane in hand, waiting. I still see him with his back to the fireplace, his small spectacles resting near the top of his nose, and his heavy cane pointing us to 3 rows of empty seats. "Sit down there," he calmly said. "And what is your name?" he said to Seamus Carr. He continued to ask us all our names, and when he was finished, he handed us copies of a New Christian Doctrine catechism. We were told to read it for the rest of the afternoon. After another month, nearly everyone had experienced a taste of the old headmaster, who in fact wasn't as brutal as we were led to believe. He was an experienced teacher who was overly fond of honesty, even if honesty was inspired by stupidity. I don't remember him ever hitting me, probably because he was a friend of my father's. One cold winter, my father had carted a load of turf to McInerney School. It had assured continued heat for a couple of weeks, and this was something that the headmaster never forgot. McInerney announced his retirement just before Easter, telling us that he'd miss us and that he had some of the best times of his life in this old school. I looked across at Seamus Carr and saw he was smirking behind his English book. After school, he told me he thought McInerney was going soft in the head from his migraine, or maybe it was something else. After Easter, our new headmaster was introduced to us by Murphy. "This is Mr. Coffey," he said. We were all standing as a mark of respect, but said nothing. And I remember Mr. Coffey looking over his dark-rimmed glasses and waiting for us to make some sort of response. We had nothing to say. Mr. Coffey continued to eye us, and pulling out his handkerchief said, "All right, boys, you may all sit down." He removed his glasses and rubbed his handkerchief all over his face and then settled the glasses back on his ears and nose. He was a small little man with a round belly and a shiny bald head. "Now," he said, "let's get to know each other." He looked at Ollie McIlroy and asked, "Son, what's your name?" "Ollie." "Ollie what?" "McIlroy." "Well, Ollie, where is County Roscommon?" "In Ireland," responded Ollie. Mr. Coffey laughed and said, "Ollie McIlroy, are you trying to be a little Lachiko?" "You are trying to be a little Lachiko, aren't you?" "Yes, sir." No, sir." Ollie was red in the face. He never heard the word before, and none of us had. Mr. Coffey turned to Bunny Hanlon. "You," he said, "where is County Roscommon?" "The west of Ireland," said Bunny. "Ah," cried Mr. Coffey, "we're getting closer." He looked at me. "You with the fair hair, what do you think where do you think it is?" "Across the Shannon," I said. He seemed pleased with what I said, and looked at us all. "County Roscommon is indeed in the western side of the river in Shannon, no doubt about it. And another thing I want you boys to remember is that County Roscommon is where I was born. It's where I grew up, in a little town called Elphin. Now get your maps out and we'll find it. A sweet to the first little boy that finds it. A sweet, is candy." Our small maps were out in a flash. Austin Hanlon found it before any of us, and Mr. Coffey gave him a sweet. This was Mr. Coffey's way of encouraging a pupil. He said, good boy," and Austin began to blush. He was afraid some of the classmates might tease him about the sweet on his way home after school. Mr. Coffey told us to study the map of Ireland while he sat at his desk. Then he began writing with his head facing downwards. He didn't look in our direction for a long time. Finally, Seamus Carr whispered, "What is he doing?" "I don't know," was my hushed reply. "Maybe he's writing a letter to his mother." So that's one little memory of the school days, and it goes on and on. Of course, the book is only doesn't deal with school all the time. It deals with many, many other things. But I have some funny memories of, when we were going to school together and all the different classmates that I got to know. And they were, apart from the teachers, it was a funny kind of a time. So, if you have any questions, you can ask me now. If not, Erin can take over here. She's just the star of the show. She's the literature giant from Minnesota, and I'm just a paltry peasant tagging along here. Hello, yes?
How long does a thatch roof last before it has to be rethatched?
Well, it can last a long time, 15 to 20 years, depending, sometimes, the thatch can, if there's a porous area in the thatch and a rainfall comes, it can, over maybe just a few years rot, and you have to just mend it, like more or less like putting a patch on the roof. But overall, if you attach the whole roof, over a period of 2 weeks and condense it, fairly tightly together, all the straw, all the various layers of straw that you punch into the roof, it can be a very successful And it also looks lovely, you know, against the whitewashed walls of the house, you know, with the yellow attached. It's really nice, especially on a sunny day. So thanks for your question.
Anybody else? There's just one back here. Just a question back here.
Did
Yes.
your parents play musical instruments?
She plays the bowline.
No. Did your parents play musical?
Oh, my parents. My mother played a little bit on the accordion, but she only played it with one finger. And she used to be kind of proud of this, like, you know, that she was the only one around anywhere that played the accordion with one finger. She thought that was great. And my father, both of them liked to sing, you know. My father was big into songs, you know, old-time ballads, you know, about songs about, you know, hangings, songs about soldiers, you know, fighting overseas. A lot of Irish soldiers, you know, were mercenaries and they fought in a lot of the major European wars.
Love gone wrong.
Yeah, and of course love gone wrong.
A staple.
Yeah, anyway, yes.
In that story, when the boys were trying to identify where that county was located, and they were giving the teacher those answers, and he uses a term that I didn't understand. I don't know what that means. The boys had never heard it either. What was that word?
Lachiko, was that the one?
Yeah.
Yeah, he used to call us, he was the only school teacher I ever heard using that word, lachiko, which means rogue or villain, you know. It's kind of a play word, you know, you know, you little lachiko, you know. But he, you know, I mean, he never used abusive language with us or anything like that. Just that one word, lachiko, and for weeks we'd be asking our parents, what was it, you know? It was the big topic around Langton, you know. What was this word, lachiko, from this man, you know?
Well, is it an Irish word?
I don't know. I never, you know, I never seen it written anywhere except in my own book.
Shall I? All right. You have to take the mic from him. We're separated by lines in here. As you may have guessed, Paddy grew up in the oral tradition in Ireland. People sitting around telling stories and things being remembered, things that happened in the locality were remembered by telling and retelling these stories. And that's the way things were in Ireland for thousands of years, you know, from the Stone Age. This is the way that information and history and genealogy and everything was passed on in Ireland, was through the oral tradition. Nothing was written down. There was no written language in Ireland until early Christian times, when the monks started to write things in Latin. And they developed the written language of Irish as well. It was spoken before then, but nobody had written it down. So my book, Book of Killowen, is sort of about both of those things, about the oral tradition and the transition to the writing tradition. Oh, get rid of Paddy's family here. Here's all his sisters and his mommy and daddy. So all of my stories, as I mentioned, this is the fourth in the series, and the first one was inspired by a true story that I heard, and all of the books since have been inspired by true stories. So the first one, Haunted Ground. I was visiting friends in Ireland after reading a book of poems by Seamus Heaney, and he often uses the bog as a metaphor for the memory of a place, so that the bog preserves things, and so this is how the earth remembers what happened there. And one particular poem, Bogland, he talks about they've taken the skeleton of the great Irish elk out of the peat, set it up, an astounding crate full of air. Butter sunk under more than 100 years was recovered salty and white. I was really astonished about this thing about the butter, you know. So I was visiting friends in Ireland and just making conversation, asked my friend's mother, did you ever hear of people finding butter in the bogs? Is that true? She said, oh yes, of course it's true. They find loads of things in bogs. And she started to tell me this whole list of things. What she didn't mention was that her son-in-law was a very famous archaeologist and the son of the head of the National Museum. And between them, they'd found loads of things in bogs, including a wooden practice sword from the Middle Ages that was perfectly preserved under the peat, 2,000-year-old bog roads, oak planks, and birch logs with the bark still intact after 2,000 years. And then she said, oh yes, then there was a story of these two brothers cutting turf in the west of Ireland who came across the perfectly preserved severed head of a beautiful red-haired girl. That's what I did. I only kept a journal while I was traveling because then my life was interesting enough to write about, you know. So I'm writing in my journal that night, thinking of writing a novel about a red-haired girl whose head is found in a bog. And I said, maybe a movie. And to that point, I had written pretty much just that journal and nothing else. I was a theater person, so I did performance, I did radio, I did all kinds of other things. I didn't write, you know. But the story of this girl, who could she be? What was she doing in the bog? Where was the rest of her? What could she possibly have done that somebody would have beheaded her and put her in this desolate bog? I just couldn't let go of her. So I thought about it for 10 years, thinking somebody should really write that novel about the red-haired girl. And I haunted Irish bookshops and could find no books, no mysteries set in a bog. I thought, that's just not right. Somebody's got to do it, even if it's got to be me. Somebody has to do it. So that's how Haunted Ground came about. I sent off the first 50 pages to the woman who was to become my agent, and she wrote back and said, well, this is a series, right? And I said, yes. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. So the second one is about all of the beautiful gold artifacts that they find in the industrial bogs in the Midlands. That's the place where Paddy used to work, where they're cutting peat by the inch and by the ton to burn in power plants to generate electricity. But they find all sorts of interesting artifacts as they're cutting down inch by inch, year after year. They find beautiful gold, caches of gold jewelry from the Bronze Age and the Iron Age that have been put there, they think, as offerings to the gods. They find butter. Funny about that. They find people who they think were human sacrifices. So the whole theme of the second book became about sacrifice because the place of sacrifice is now being cut away and destroyed because we need electricity. So we're sacrificing the place of sacrifice. So it had some interesting kind of echoes in it. The two main characters in all of these novels are Nora Gavin, who's a pathologist, somebody who studies anatomy, and she's very interested in bog people, and that's how she kind of gets pulled into these stories. And Cormac McGuire, who is an archaeologist who specializes in wetland excavation. So they meet in the first book, and they sort of continue on these adventures in all of the other stories. And each one dips into a different period in history. The red-haired girl was from about 350 years ago, so it examines what happened when Cromwell invaded Ireland in 1650, the repercussions of that. Because the past is never really past. It's always with us. It's always underfoot. The second story examines Iron Age sacrifice, and they find somebody in the bog next to an Iron Age bogman who's wounded in the same way as if he were a human sacrifice from that time, but he's wearing a wristwatch. So they have to figure out the connection between those two people. Whoops. Going backwards here. There we go. The third book in the series, Cormac and Nora have split up, not romantically split up, they're still together, but she's gone back to her hometown of St. Paul, Minnesota. She was born in Ireland, but grew up in St. Paul. And she's trying to solve the mystery that has haunted her for the last 5 years, and that is the murder of her sister. She suspects her brother-in-law, but she doesn't have any evidence against him, so she's determined to find it this time. And Cormac is in Donegal, northwest part of Ireland, and he's working with a folklorist friend, and they're investigating a disappearance of a woman about 100 years ago who was thought to have been a Selkie. Does everybody know Selkies? Some people, I see heads nodding. Selkies are seals who shed their skins and become human for a time. And when they're children, it's usually the children who find their seal skin and return it to them, they must return to the sea. So it's like the story of a mermaid. It's a hard, difficult, sad story of a divided existence, of people having to decide which world they're going to live in. And as it turns out, Nora's sister is kind of a shapeshifter, like seals and selkies and mermaids as well. And so there are those kind of parallel stories going on in False Mermaid. So when the fourth book came up, I thought, gee, this thing keeps repeating. It's got a hiccup. There we go. When the fourth book came up, I thought, what am I going to make this about? But fortunately, as soon as something turns up in the bogs of Ireland, I get 100 emails. Somebody lets me know. Have you heard about this? Have you heard about this? So in 2007, I believe, there were workmen in this bog in Tipperary. It's a place called Fadden Moor, and they're cutting these big blocks of turf, peat, to grind up as peat moss for gardening. They're using big machines going down the banks. You can see the size of them there, they're really huge. Oh, by the way, I brought some turf.
Want to pass that around? Take a look at it. Pass it around.
So the turf that I brought is good for burning. This isn't good for burning. It's way too pale and too recent. The old turf is maybe a few thousand years old. This may be only a couple thousand years old. So they're stacking up these big lumps of peat that they've cut down this bank. The guy on the right, his name is Eddie Fogarty, saw something fall out underneath the block of turf that he was cutting. And here's what he saw when he picked up the block. Anybody guess what that might be? Any theories? Sorry? Shield? No? A book. Yes, I heard it over here. It is a book. And as it turns out, that book had been in the bog for about 1,000 years. It was about a 8th, 9th century book. No book had ever been found in an Irish bog before. So this was huge news. The National Museum was called immediately. And the landowners and Eddie had looked inside this book and they said to the National Museum, you better get out here quick. We found something that's like the Book of Kells. Because they saw these illuminated pages inside. It was so exciting. So the National Museum people rushed out and found that the book had gone into the bog open. It was opened to a page, and you could read some of the writing on that page. About 4 lines down, you can see here, it says, in Vale Lacrimarum, in the Vale of Tears. So they knew that this was from the Book of Psalms. And if you look up that little phrase, you'll find out it's Psalm 83. And Book of Psalms would have been a common book for the monks and the scribes to carry. They used the Psalms as writing practice. Often you'd see them, just using it to practice their lettering. So this would have been a common book, but this was a pretty fancy Book of Psalms, so they were pretty excited about it. This is what it looked like when it came out of the bog. So you can see it was kind of looks like roast beef hash to me, But there were edges of pages that still were good, and the one little spot where you could still read the lettering. And I talked to the guy who did the conservation. It took him 2.5 years peeling apart those wet pages and pressing them between layers of plexiglass and trying to dry them without shrinking them. And most of the pages were dyed a dark, dark brown, and so the writing wasn't really terribly visible. But you can go to the National Museum of Ireland now and see pages from this book that he was able to save. And they're not whole pages, they're fragments. So he must have just been going nuts that this thing was falling apart in front of his eyes. Wonderful letters and decorations and carpet pages that just fell apart. Now the interesting thing was that the ink for most of the writing was oak gall ink. You know those little fruit-like things that grow on oak trees? They're full of tannic acid. The monks used to grind those up and use them to make their ink. So where the tannic acid bit into the calfskin page, the page was preserved. And where the letter wasn't written, it turned into kind of gelatin. So he was going through with his tweezers, picking out this alphabet soup of letters. He was almost more excited about the wrapper that the book came in. It's pigskin incised with what we call Celtic designs nowadays. And its lining was papyrus. And so it was the first physical evidence of a connection between the monasteries of Ireland and monasteries of North Africa, where papyrus grows. They didn't have any evidence of that before, so this was a really huge finding as well. And the 3 buttons are typical of a 9th century book. So I remember being back at the Collins Barracks, the National Museum Conservation Laboratory, when I was doing research for earlier books. And the day I was there, just happened to snap this picture, and somebody had just brought in an artifact that had been found in a bog. So here's the technician, he's picking the wet peat off of it, they're gonna look and see what it is. And it turns out to be a satchel, leather bag, about like this, big long strap handle. And you will never guess where it was found. I only found this out later. It came from a place in Tipperary called Fadden Moor, only a few yards away from where the book turned up 8 years later. So the archaeologists won't say, oh yes, they're connected, but the satchels are what the monks used to carry and store their books. They didn't use bookcases because the books were soft. So they would put them in satchels and put them on pegs on the wall, and then when the Vikings came to raid their monastery, they could hightail it out over the water. So, I'm a crime writer. I'm thinking, how could this be turned into a story? They found a book, they found a satchel, and where's the guy who was carrying the book in the satchel? They haven't found him in the Fadden Moor bog yet, but I'm a fiction writer, so I've been there. Oh, I imagine he might be carrying a wax tablet. This is an actual 7th century wax tablet with verses from the Psalms written on it. You can see the Irish handwriting. Irish monks had a particular way of making their letters. It's called the Irish hand. I learned about vellum making and how they have to soak the calf skins with lime and water for weeks and weeks until the hair falls off, and scrape them and stretch them and sand them down so that they're a nice fine writing surface, and cut them and score the pages. I learned about oak gall ink making and all of the other bizarre substances that the monks used for their inks and pigments. The gallbladders of eels for yellow ink, insects ground up for crimson. And they bound their inks and pigments with egg white and egg yolk, and they still do that today. If you look at the St. John's Bible, if anybody has seen that, they use the same techniques and the same pigments today. It's just amazing. Back to the music here too. It's an oak gall. Close up you can see that it's actually a place where a wasp lays an egg and the larvae drill out through those little holes. And I studied all of the pages that the monks made, these wonderful books with beautiful writing, beautiful designs. Sometimes the writing was hidden inside the design. You had to stare at the page for hours and hours before you could see the words sort of begin to emerge. And the thing about Irish monks was that they copied every book they could get their hands on, not just the Gospels and the Psalms, but books of geography and mathematics and philosophy and ethnography and medical books and just everything that they could get their hands on. They copied because they knew it was important to preserve these things. And they copied even things that the church frowned upon, some philosophers whose works were considered heretical. They copied, or they wrote down for the first time some of their own myths and sagas from Ireland. So they'd be writing down the story of Cuchulainn or Queen Maeve, and then they'd write on the margin of the page, "This is nothing but pagan rubbish." And then they would keep writing it. They had to make faithful copies. They had to copy exactly what was in front of them. Otherwise, they could be excommunicated, so they had to be very careful. If there was a hole on the page, they copied the hole. It's really amazing. Even works of heretical people like John Scotus Eriugena. And sometimes they added their own work to the page as well. They weren't satisfied just copying. This is a huge, boring Latin grammar book. Look at all that. Oh my gosh, so dull. So the monk added his own little poem at the end. It says, "A hedge of trees surrounds me, a blackbird's lay sings to me, praise which I will not hide. Above my manuscript, the lined one, the trilling of the birds sings to me. In a gray mantle, the cuckoo sings a beautiful chant to me from the tops of bushes. May the Lord protect me from doom. I write well under the green wood." This one is a little poem about Hanger Bon, a white cat, and the monk is describing himself and his work. He's making a translation. So he says he's hunting for words all night, and the cat is at his work hunting for mice all night. And so he goes back and forth describing the two of them at their jobs. They also complained a lot about the working conditions. "Do not reproach me concerning the letters. The ink is bad, the parchment scanty, the day dark. 20 days to Easter Monday, and I am cold and tired. I am Cormac, son of Cosnamoc, and there is some devil in this ink. Thin ink, bad vellum, difficult text. This vellum is hairy." And my absolute favorite of all time. "Now I've written the whole thing. For Christ's sake, give me a drink." These are actual pieces of marginalia that have been found at the edges of books. So they became such human beings to me, and I knew I had to put real monks and scribes into my story. So maybe that's a good time to skip forward a little bit. Oh no, see, that's what I did.
What is that on the right?
I don't know what that chart is. I'll have to find out. Probably some numerology theory. Oh my gosh, look at this. Wave. Then you can see all these again. Yay. So I began to think about what kind of a story would be about a monk or a scribe and somebody found in a bog, satchel, and how did the book get there? And so I started to think about a story that would involve maybe an opening that happened in ancient times, and then modern people would take over and find this person in the bog and have to try and figure out what was he doing there, how did it happen, do their detective work. And I set it on a farm that is based on the farm of a friend of mine in Ireland. And I wanted it to be sort of, organic farm, but also an artist retreat, a place where people would come and do their artwork and live in little cabins out in the woods. And as it turned out, I put my 9th century man into the trunk of a car. I knew about somebody who had buried his entire car in the bog because he didn't have insurance, and I thought, oh, let's use that. And then my writers group were all saying, well, wait a minute, how does a 9th century man get into the trunk of a car? I said, I have no idea. I have to write the book to find out. I don't know. This is how it happens. I don't know how it ends. So I think I'll skip the pictures of the farm. So I'll read you a little bit from the first part of the Book of Killowen. And there are 2 men in this little scene to begin with. One is called Owen, and he is up in a tree. He's a scribe. And he's up in the tree because he is collecting oak galls. He needs to make a little bit more ink because he and his master, who's a famous scholar, are traveling across Ireland. And as they travel, they're working on what he calls the master's great work, a new manuscript, very exciting work. Owen looked down from his perch in the tree at the master, still sunning himself by the edge of the bog pool. The oak leaves around him stirred in the breeze, and morning sunlight played on the water, making a golden checkerboard that seemed to move and meld together. And Owen was filled with such an unaccustomed feeling of well-being. His mind combining the contours of the oak leaf with the glinting ripples, all part of the enfolding mysteries of Vita Aeternum. And he knew exactly what sorts of embellishments he would try out on the pages his master would dictate today. They would argue, and Owen would ask questions. He had become a part of the master's work. He was even allowed to add a gloss from time to time, adding the warmth of his breath to amplify the master's thoughts and words. It was a joyful thing, seeing their two hands on the page side by side. All at once, Owen's thoughts were disturbed by a distant, faint sound of horses approaching. A jagged panic shot through him. From childhood, his first impulse at the prospect of meeting unfriendly stares had always been to hide. And so he climbed higher in the tree, hoping to conceal himself amid its leathery green leaves. As he slipped from sight, a pair of horsemen came charging through the wood, pausing directly below the tree where he was concealed. The forest floor muffled any hoofbeats. All Owen could hear was the squeaking of leather saddles, the rasp of labored breathing. "There he is," the first horseman said to his mate, pointing through the trees at the master. "I confess it's beyond me why anyone should be frightened of such a weak old man." The second rider only grunted. They were so close below Owen that he could smell the rank odor of their bodies. There was an edge in the speaker's voice that said these two were fighting men. They seemed to know his master. What were they after? Owen felt a sudden whirlwind of words in his throat, trying to force their way out, and his first instinct, as always, was to keep them from escaping. He stuffed his fist into his mouth and bit down hard, pain erasing for a brief moment the overpowering need to speak. The first horseman spurred his mount out of the wood and down to the bog's edge, his silent second following. The master turned to them, offering the traditional greeting, "God be with you." In answer, he received a clout across the face that bloodied his lip and robbed him of breath. He staggered slightly but did not cry out. Hidden in the oak, Owen felt the air around him crackle with danger. He must do something, help the master, but how? "Are you called John?" the first horseman demanded. "After the Baptist," the master replied mildly, "the very same." The first horseman gestured to the leather satchel at the master's feet and exchanged a glance with his mate. "Where's your servant?" "I wish I knew," the master replied. "He disappeared last night. Took our store of food. I'm left here with nothing to eat but my own words." He gestured to the satchel on the ground. Owen nearly cried out. He had taken nothing. Why was the master lying? He felt a slowly rising horror as the horsemen dismounted, and each drew a knife from his belt. The pair of them fell upon the old man, thrusting their blades with an upward motion, again and again and again. Over the assassin's shoulders, the master raised his eyes to the tree where Owen crouched, hidden among the leaves. "The beginning and the end," the old man wheezed. "Alpha and Omega." At last the two horsemen stepped back and let the master's lifeless body topple to the ground. Owen could hardly breathe, but he felt the uncontrollable sounds begin to rise within him once more. He bit down on his fist again, this time tasting salty blood. "Shield me, cover me," he prayed to the tall oak, to each of its branches and leaves. "Hide me from the conspiracy of the wicked, from the noisy crowd of evildoers." Suddenly, a third horseman burst through the woods, pulling his beast up short and dismounting beside his fellows. "So you found him. Good." He spat on the master's body. "How goes it for you, heretic? No king to protect you now." The third man snatched up the satchel from the master's feet and looked inside, removing the book he found there and paging through it before flinging it aside. "Bloody fools!" he shouted. "Amadons! You should have checked the book before you killed him. It's not the one we're after, it's only a bloody psalter." Owen felt the last word like another blow. The psalter was his own, the one he'd copied out for himself. But if the master had his psalter, what was in his own bag? He suddenly felt the weight of the satchel pulling him down like a stone. The third horseman wasn't finished. "What about the idiot servant?" "Gone. We looked everywhere," the first assassin lied. The third man narrowed his eyes, trying to gauge whether his defiant underling spoke the truth. "Well, see that you find him. It shouldn't be too difficult. They say he howls like a banshee." He swung his leg over his horse again. "Now get rid of the body. See if you can manage to get that right." Owen could only watch as the two men dragged his master out onto the bog. They pushed the body into a dark pool, waiting until it was swallowed up without a sound. Almost as an afterthought, the second horseman reached for the psalter and satchel and flung them into the pool as well. Still hidden in the tree, Owen covered his mouth and wept silently, watching as the open book seemed to float for a few seconds, like a pale pair of wings, and then submerged. So that's my theory about how a book ended up open in the bog. It could have happened that way, I don't know. So, as you may have noticed, Owen in that story has trouble with his speech, and he has what we would call today Tourette's syndrome. And that's an important distinction for him. It's part of the reason that he became a scribe, is that it was the only time when he was writing that he didn't speak out of turn. I was fascinated. Oliver Sacks was describing, I think, a neurosurgeon that he knew who had Tourette's. When he was doing surgery, he never ticked. And when he was flying his airplane, he never had any tics. I was fascinated by that. So I gave Owen this ability to write fluidly without any tics. It's I don't know if it's a focus of concentration or what is it that causes that. There's a character later in the book as well. One of the modern characters has the same condition, and he may or may not be connected somehow to Owen. We'll see about that. And Cormac's father has had a stroke, and so he has a form of aphasia and can't make himself understood. He can't find the correct words to express what he needs to say. There's a young woman who's a Spanish speaker who's trying to make herself understood in English. So it's all about the mysteries of language, and language as a vehicle for communication, but also an impediment to communication in many ways. I'm playing around with all of those ideas, and then also the idea of what is a book, because the book is sort of the focus of this mystery and the possession of the book, and who has it and who doesn't, and who has the knowledge that's inside it, and those kinds of things. My characters are all debating about, is a book a physical object, or is a book a collection of ideas and thoughts and words that can be transmitted in many different forms? We're having that debate right now. And I find it really interesting.
Yeah, Miss Hart, that brings to my mind a comment. I just got a tablet last night.
Yes.
And I can, and I'm playing around with it, see if I can get a Bible on a tablet.
Yeah.
And before I go, I have to share an insight. Is a book something that can be transmitted from in those kind of waves, or those kind of particles, or those kind of invisible transmissions, or transient images?
Yes. This is what we're debating right now. Is it a book if you do that,
Yes.
So it's something that isn't resolved, but I think it's interesting to think about.
And it probably won't be resolved as tablets and Androids and smartphones.
Right? Who knows what
connected devices become
what books will be
in
100 years, Yeah. So anyway, the characters debate about all of those sorts of things. I'm sure that when the printing press was invented in the 16th century, that all of the monks were going around saying to one another, well, it's not a real book unless it's been written out by hand. But imagine living in a time when every single book in the world had been written by a human being. It really boggles the mind. Anyway, thank you for your kind attention. We're going to have a bit more music here. I think we're going to take a short break, maybe 10 minutes or so. Give people a chance to get up and walk around, grab some refreshments, go to the bathroom. Fill out evaluation surveys, yes, for the prize. And then we'll be back up here in 10 minutes with some more tunes from the guys and dancing if you wish. So please stay in your seats. If you want to just listen to the music, that's great. And if we need to make room for dancing, we will do so. Thanks. Oh yeah, hand across the CDs along with us as well, so they're over there if you want to have a look. And also you can get on our mailing list. We send out newsletters maybe once or twice a year, very seldom.
first one was called The Fry's Bridges, and the second one was The Mist-Covered Mountain, and that very last one there was called My Darling Asleep, which is a nice thing to see. Back not terribly long ago in Ireland, they used to dance, especially in Donegal and County Sligo. They would dance what they called Scottishes and Germans as well. And they were kind of like hornpipes. But we're going to play 3 Scottishes here just to give you a taste of the rhythm and the sound of what they are.
A Scottish is the same as a Scottish.
Is it a Scottish? I thought that was the name of how you shoe a horse. Sorry, I never. I'm always being corrected by my wife. Anyway, here's 3 of them. The first one is called Green Broad Rushes. The second one is The Sunny Banks. And I think the third one is named after a woman, fiddle player from West County Clare, Mrs. Galvins.
You could do a Scottish over here. I don't know how to do a Scottish, but if you want to do
Sure. 1, 2, 3. Really? You can?
All right, we're going to play a few polkas now, and you may not have heard some Irish polkas. In particular, these ones are from County Kerry, and in Kerry, in parts of County Kerry, they do a lot of what they call polka sets, you know, and they also do sets, and the music played for those are slides, which are essentially, you know, like single jigs, and both selections are played very rapidly. Great way to prepare for the Olympic Games, you know. But anyway, I think we just thought we'd play a few. These are the Ballydesmond polkas, named after a town in Kerry, northwest Kerry, that you might just enjoy.
Those two. Those two? Yeah. You want to see first? If you want to go in for them. That's all right. Yeah, okay. And orange. Let's do that first. All right. 1, 2.
Does anybody feel like dancing? Or did you eat too much this evening? No? You need Guinness? We're going to do a waltz, just in case anybody wants to waltz with somebody. Would that be all right? Yeah? There's a little bit of room out here. And this is the Portuguese waltz. We played this the other night, and we got a bunch of fan mail the next day. your regular notes here on the inside row, and you get your sharps and flats on the outside row. Same principle as a piano, except that this is, you get two different notes for each book. By pressing the pedals.
Same button.
I'm going to play a slow air here just to give you an idea of what a slow air is. It's basically the melody of a Shannon song, and in this case it's called A Stone McCree, which means love of my heart. It's an emigration song about somebody leaving Ireland, either a young man or a young woman, you know, and they would have an American wake for the person leaving, in most cases in the old days they knew they wouldn't see the person probably ever again, you know, so I try playing it. last selection was called The Fox Hunter's Reel, very first one that Barry and Paul started together on. And the second one was Maud Miller's favourite, and then we went into one called the Abbey Reel, named after a village in East County Galway, and the very last one is named after a famous Irishman of good nature called Sporting Paddy. So we're going to finish off this set now here with some jigs, and Barry is consulting with a very involved piece of paper here on the floor that has the tune titles.
Let's do it. Oh, yeah.
Okay, and the first one is called Dr. O'Neill's Favourite, and it's named after a man called Francis O'Neill, who collected Irish music in Chicago before and around the turn of the last century, and he became a very famous man in Irish traditional music, Captain Francis O'Neill. He was also chief of police in Chicago around from 1904 to 1908, I think. And anyway, the first jig is named after him, and the second and third jig are both have the same names or titles, called The Pipe of the Hog and The Pipe in the Hog. And the very last one then is The Dusty Windowsill, which is a fairly contemporary composition composed by a guy, a whistle player in Chicago by the name of Johnny Harley, whom I used to know back in the 1990s, but since he got married, he disappeared and I don't know where he is.
Don't let this happen to you. You knew it was something like that. Yeah. 1, 2.
very much. It's been a pleasure playing for you. And I'd like to introduce you now here to Paddy Foy, who played the fiddle and the banjo. And our good friend, Paul Whaling, on the what do you call that instrument? The bouzouki on bass. And myself, Paddy O'Brien, and I've one little question for you. Is what do you call it, an Irishman that's dead and buried in their bog for over 2,000 years? Nobody knows, and the answer is Pete.
Question, Erin, for you, Paddy. Thank you very much for coming, everybody. It's been a delight to be here.
St. Paul, Minnesota.
There's Rebecca.
I wasn't there in almost 4 years. Yes. But I don't get homesick like I used to, you know. I only got homesick when I was drinking Guinness, and I quit drinking.
Oh, you can drink something.
I drink plenty of Diet Coke. Well, anyway, it was very nice playing for you all, and you're all wonderful people, and I wish you a happy future every evening.